Okay, great. So we've had a lot of people sign on. We're going to get started now. Good morning, or good afternoon, I should say. I'd like to thank you all for joining our SharePoint webinar for the life sciences industry. Today, Pharmica consultant Elliot Porter is going to walk us through a sample migration, then field any questions that you have. Please feel free to use the GoToMeeting interface to ask questions at any time during the presentation. I also wanted to take a moment to let you all know that the webinar you're attending today is one of 3 webinars Pharmica is hosting this month. Next Wednesday, the 17th, we will be hosting a pharmacovigilance webinar where we'll demonstrate proactive approaches to reduce late cases, improve the quality and compliance oversight in all areas of pharmacovigilance, and that's going to lead to fewer CAPAs and improved health authority inspection readiness. The following Tuesday, the 23rd, we're hosting a webinar where we will demonstrate Pharmica's SharePoint-based resource management tool and show how it's helping companies bridge the gap between Excel and million-dollar solutions. So you can see the details and register for those webinars at pharmicaconsulting.com. All right, so with that, I'll turn it over to Elliot. Elliot, take it away.
Hi, everybody. I'm Elliot Porter. I have about 20 years of SharePoint and knowledge management experience. And with us today, I'd like to present my fellow team members. Nick Lagrada, he's a SharePoint architect and a PMP. He's got about 15 years of life sciences experience. Billy, who was just talking a moment ago, got a lot of SharePoint experience, and he was the guy who put this all together. And Matt Kiernan, our fearless leader, who has over 25 years of experience in the pharmaceutical industry. Before we begin, I'd just like to take a moment to introduce you to Pharmica if you haven't dealt with us before. We specialize in delivering end-to-end solutions. That is, bringing together everything from the requirements gathering stage all the way to implementation and continuing support. We deal with everything from farm architecture and installation all the way through to delivery. And we have experts within our organization that can work with you and your organization to develop cloud hosting solutions, site configurations, creative design, as well as your business processes and workflows. We are good at leveraging our critical business processes in pharmaceuticals and other areas in market. And we have a unique combination of not just developers, but people with pharmaceutical experience and doing things like process optimization. Our in-house experts are adept at developing solutions as well as providing training. And we've hosted many SharePoint conferences over the past year, and we're doing that on a continual basis to expand our reach. But before we begin, I just want to point out the one thing that's really important that I think we do better than a lot of other people, and that's we build SharePoint sites that people want to use, that are good for the employees, and that don't just build them to build it, but it's building them and then continuing that adoption process, which is so difficult, in whenever you're dealing with an intranet site. So Matt said to me the other day, "Hey, Elliot, would you be interested in doing a talk about SharePoint? Something like a migration." So I said, "Sure. How many hours do I have?" And he said, "Well, you got about half an hour." And after I picked myself up off the floor, laughing so hard, I said, "Sure, I can talk about, a sample SharePoint migration in half an hour, but I'm only going to be able to touch on the highlights of what we're going to do." And so here you can see a lot of bullets and details, and I'm going to do my best to cover them in as much depth as I can in the following half hour. So what are the challenges with a migration? And just an informal survey provides things like information architecture, change management, governance, accurate planning and adoption. How am I going to build this thing out? There's so many ways of designing my information architecture. How am I going to ensure that I stay within scope? And how am I going to keep my site from scaling wildly and keep it all within an organized fashion? And then very often when you're dealing with migration, you want to get something that's planned accurately, that I can say it's going to be on budget and on time. And only through experience and doing this over and over again will you get that level of accurate planning. And again, adoption. It's so important. Not just building something, but building something that somebody wants to use. So we were left in this sample migration that we're going to talk about today with several lofty goals. We want something that's scalable. We also want something that's going to be upgradable. So, you know, today we're in SharePoint 2013. We might move to SharePoint Online. If there's going to be the next version of SharePoint and the version of SharePoint after that. We want to maintain some sort of future upgradability to our site. We also don't want to invest too much in custom solutions. We want to keep things out of the box as much as possible. We want that whatever we develop, we can move easily. That won't involve too much IT effort. We don't want to install things on servers and worry about them breaking. And we don't want a SharePoint-y feel. How many times have you heard that? Whenever you're in IT and you're dealing with a client and someone says, I want a site, but I don't want it to look like SharePoint. Very often, just moving to SharePoint 2013, if you're coming from 2007 or 2010, will give you an upgraded feel, but we don't want it to look SharePoint-y. And we want fast access to the top content. So very often you're left with the question of, is it better if I spend if I look in my audit logs and I see that somebody spent 10 minutes on my site, or is it better if it was in 2 or 3 clicks they got to the information that they needed most? So we want fast access to top content, not just a site that makes you click through lots and lots of links. And here's an example of what we came up with. It doesn't have that SharePoint-y feel. It's colorful. It's interactive. It's got some stickiness. You'll notice there's a little trivia piece on the front page. And there's icon-based navigation so that if you're using a mobile device, it's easy to navigate to those pieces of content. So when we're talking about our migration plan, we're going to take a look at the scope. And I know this is going to sound very project management principle-like, but it's really important that you have a clear set of goals before going about your process. How will this new architecture enable your business? And are we going to try to enable more business processes? And how are we going to do that? So we're going to develop a good charter. And we're going to develop a stakeholder registry. We want to know who is it that we have to interact with on a continual basis. And we're going to do a really good job at our requirements gathering from those stakeholders. We want to have a qualitative set of measurements for success. So, for example, I want all of my data available within 5 clicks. And we'll develop tests later on to say, did we meet that goal? We also want to make sure it's maybe mobile friendly or externally accessible or confidential. So all of that has to be obtained in your requirements gathering part. And again, in clear and testable goals. And next we're going to look at our team. We have to decide what teams are we going to use. Are we going to use internal resources, external resources? Are we going to use onshore, offshore? All of that has to be done upfront and decided in our initial scoping process. And then we want to develop a good communication plan. Now, the communication plan is so important because that's how we're going to keep our stakeholders engaged. And we're going to work not just with the stakeholders, but with all employees. We're going to announce our plans and the preparation steps that they need to take. We want them to go through their content and clean it up. We want them to give us their ideas and understand what it is that we want from them and what we want them to do. And we're going to create calls to action. So we want you to do this now and that then, but they have to know when to do that. And so that's going to all be in our communication plan. And we're going to communicate with them on a continual basis through the migration. So depending on the size of your organization, you might do everything in one fell swoop, or it might be done in phases. So we want to let them know what's happening when. And just because we've migrated the content doesn't mean that the continuing effort of offering support and training stops. That has to be part of your process going forward. So whenever we engage in any sort of migration, we want to keep that in mind. So the next step is engagement. And we're going to create some working sessions with our stakeholders. We want to understand, not just from the leadership, but from the people and employees that are using your information, what is it that they want from their data and their website? How can we enable them and make their lives easier? So we're going to do that, and then we're going to start analyzing what they have now. And we're going to say, okay, they have data here. It might come from a file share. It might be from an existing site. It might come from a database. And we're going to work on creating an inventory of their content now, what their architecture looks like. And then we're going to start investigating how we can best migrate. So we're going to look at the different methods for migration, whether it's going to be a lift and shift. So we're going to take either their current database and just move it along and upgrade it, if it's possible, or are we going to build templates and rebuild their sites? Or maybe we're going to have a side-by-side environment where we're going to migrate some content, but the majority of content that's old is going to exist where it is now, and then eventually we'll move over by creating new content in their new environment. So when we look at the development process, it's very easy, and often an approach that a lot of people look at taking seriously is, let's just take whatever we have now and move it to the new environment. Well, it doesn't require a whole lot of process because it's pretty easy. I just take what I have now and I move it. But there are several disadvantages to that. That people get used to seeing bad content in the old place. They're going to come to the new place and they're going to see old bad content there. You're not taking advantages of the new features. You're not integrating different business units. So it's really important to actually take a look and say, you know what, we can do this better. And very often what I recommend is, let's build out our new navigation, design interfaces, create templates, and then move into that. We're going to create a scalable design. That's going to help reduce the chances of having bad content in the future, because we're going to build in some processes to make sure that your content is current and relevant. It does take a little bit more effort up front, that's true, but the end result is always much better because you now have the experience from the old environment that you can apply to your new development effort. And here's an example of a template that we've created. This is a sample collaboration template, and you can see it has some features through it that enable the average teams or communities to kind of work together a little bit better. We have calendars, we have communication lists, an area for helpful links, and most importantly, we have a contact on every page. Having a contact on every page makes a lot of sense and is really important, because I have a problem on this page or this site, I know who to go to. And it's not just some random help inquiry, but actually the person who has ownership of that site. And the added benefit there is having an owner listed on the site also makes them a little bit more accountable for the information there. And so they are now going to take a better look at the information and make sure it's current and valid. And if it's not, they're going to get called out on it. But what do you do if you have some custom sites? Very often you're going to go through your migration process and you're going to see most of them can fit into a template, but there are going to be ones that don't. And what do we do with those? So it's important to actually validate and make sure that those sites aren't just a different look to a standard site and that we don't need to have a custom site. But if they do need a custom site, we have to identify our resources up front. And that may impact our platform decision. So we are going to take that into account as well. So we want to see what mix of sites we have that can be standard development, and then what sort of sites are going to need custom development and more hand-holding perhaps, or will it need actual custom code developed for it. Now, I mentioned we're going to have to make a decision about what platform we're going to move to. And so very often we're looking at SharePoint Online versus an on-premise evaluation. SharePoint Online is great. It's inexpensive relative to on-prem for many situations, but it does have some drawbacks, like you can't have any installed solutions, or you can't group by content type or mail to a list. So it's not for everybody, but if you can use it, it's great. It reduces impact on your IT group. It also has great levels of expandability. But the actual decision-making process is kind of detailed, a little more than we can cover today. But I did give you some notes here that you can check back later on and see if they help you a little bit. And now we're going to get to the information architecture portion of it. We've decided what platform we were going to do. We've already talked to our employees and we've done some homework and understanding what we have. And we're going to now create our information architecture based upon doing some tools that we have, like card sorting exercises, mind maps, and use cases. Use cases are really important. It gives us the examples of how people are going to use the information. The people going to the site, are they going to be the employees within the team or within the group, or will it be marketing that team to outside teams in the organization? And depending on the size of the organization, that may make some sort of impact. And as well, we want to take a look at the 80-20 rule, sort of modified for this, in that we have 80% of the people are looking for just 20% of the information, and we want to surface that. And so how are we going to surface that? How are we going to design an interface that gives our employees the information they're looking for? Are we going to design a search-based navigation? So basically, it's like Google. You walk up to the screen, there's a big box, you type in what you're looking for, and it feeds it back to you. Are we going to go for a menu? So I'm going to get a whole bunch of options on the screen, and I'm going to have to start clicking through menus to find the information. Or am I going to use a push design? And that is, I can tell who you are in the organization by certain pieces of information, and now I'm going to start pushing to you what I think is relevant. It might be the content that you've uploaded or the content that you've touched. It might be related to what team you're on or your location. Or it might be some sort of hybrid where you have all of the above. And now we're going to develop our site structure. And we're going to take a look. Where are we going to put all of this information? Are we going to separate this out and have a portal and area and then a separate team area for collaboration? Maybe it'll be mixed. So you might have your main site and then subsites beneath it within which you might do your actual collaboration. A lot of that will depend upon your organization, the size of which will have a big impact. In this case, for example, we actually have a separate site collection for the portal, which is what we call the publishing area of information, where it's mostly push. There's just a few editors that are going to push out managed content. And then a separate area for our teams to go where they can go in and actually do their active collaboration. And you might have then a separate custom environment where you're going to have those applications that you've developed. Now, all of this is great, but you really need to still work on your content map and your taxonomy. And so building out your content types and building out your term store is so important for your navigation and for finding your information later on. So we have to work really hard on making sure that we have administrators for the organization that are going to take ownership of your taxonomy, of your content types, of your term stores. They're going to be the gateway and one of the ways that we're going to manage the governance of your site to make sure that everything kind of falls in place and that things don't go out of whack. We also want to make sure that we have a system for tracking and creating new sites and permission management. So we want to have the governance model already developed to fit in with your architecture. Now here's an example of a sitemap that we have developed that automatically builds itself. So when someone comes in and they request a new site, it adds a node into our sitemap. And that's great, because what that does is it enables us to say, this is where this fits in within the organization. Now it doesn't work in every case, but in this case, we've built this automated tool to manage the sprawl and to have that tracking and navigation later on. Now, one of the major impacts that you're going to have by having a good taxonomy is you're going to have a good search experience. And having a search administrator is very helpful, because that person is going to work with the taxonomy experts, and we're going to be able to label the information and modify search. Search can surface information based on various parameters. So you can do it based on what is most frequently requested. You can modify search to give you ranked results, or you can load the results up with what you think people are looking for. And so having a search administrator is very helpful in that regard. And then you can see on the left side, we have custom refiners built into our search based on our taxonomy. So if I was looking for a TV, I could say I want a flat screen TV that's 27 inches, that's ultra high definition with HDMI inputs for computer or whatever. And using those refiners will help you narrow down your information. And then we can use other areas in search to feed you what we think is important to you. So now we're going to get into the process of actually analyzing the content that we have. So we know all of the taxonomy and the content types that we're going to create. And we're going to make a decision tree, and we're going to see in a log what content are we going to keep? Where can we improve our data? Where do we have opportunity to merge libraries or lists? What information are we going to archive or delete? And we're going to do that by ranking the content. We're also going to have an owner registry. So we're going to make a map and say, this person owns this piece of content in the old location and in the new location. And we're going to then use spreadsheet, and it might be like the one on the bottom where you have different columns for the content type, where the current location is, or it might be, rather than file-based, it might be site-based or library-based. And we're going to say this library is going to move from here to wherever it is. So it's really important, map that old content, get an understanding of what you have, and then where it's going to go. So once you have your content identified, you've identified your owners, we now have to get into the process of how are we going to actually move the information over. And so we're going to take a look at our mix of assets. And we're going to say, okay, we can use employees that are onshore or maybe remote. We might choose to use some consulting. Again, it could be onshore or offshore to minimize the impact to your organization and to minimize costs. Now, one of the great things about using people to move your information is that they have the ability to look at it and they can decide, is this really old stuff, I don't want to move it, or, maybe it's not relevant information or it's miscategorized. So very often, I would make the recommendation, if you have small bits of information, use people to do it. It's much faster to set up where you have an individual taking just a few documents and moving it over to another place, or merging the content of different areas, rather than using a tool to do it. So now tools are great when you have to move lots of information from one place to another, or if you need to maintain a version history for your documents that you're migrating. Again, that might be a good time to use a tool. You can use tools to put the information, like merge lists or whatever, but what tools don't do well, in my experience, is moving over pages. And so going back to one of my earlier slides where I mentioned we're going to develop a template for the site, that's where it works really well. You develop the template, the tool can now move the content from the old location to the new location, and it'll work. But tools really don't do a good job so far of actually rebuilding the pages from your old location to the new location. And it requires a lot of manual intervention. I got to set it up. It takes a long time to do that. I need specialized people to do that. It has to be installed on the servers. Whereas if you don't have a lot of information that has to get moved over, sometimes it's actually just faster to manually do it by hand. So let's take a look at the process that we're going to use to actually migrate the information. So the first step is we're going to build the site. We have our content types. We've built our templates. We know where the content is going to go. We set up our tools, and we're going to do a pre-migration. That is, we're going to take our content from the old site, move it over to the new site. We're not going to distribute the link or make the permissions available to everybody yet. But we are going to give it to the site owners, and we're going to ask them to test it. Does this look and work the way you want it to work? Does this do what you need it to do? And is the information that you wanted moved over already there? Once they confirm that, we can then freeze the old site, and that is lock down the permissions and change it so that people can't upload to the old location. We'll then migrate any missing or delta information, like new documents that were uploaded, or we might ask the site owner to do that. And then we'll add a redirect, and we'll say, okay, we've moved your site. Give them 10 seconds or so to read the message, tell them to update their bookmarks, and then redirect them to the new site. At which point, we might keep the old site up for a little while, like a month or two, to review the information there, make sure we got everything and no questions are looming, at which point you can then archive or sunset your old environment. Now, one of the most important things is we've migrated our content. How are we going to manage this? And so we want to make sure that we only make changes to the environment that have been vetted. And so we want to have an owner registry, a feature request registry, and make sure we have a mindset that allows us to upgrade in the future, so that whatever we're going to do, it has to fit in with our model. And so we're going to also develop retention schedules. And we're going to say, okay, we only want documents that have been vetted to stay on the site. And maybe we'll have a process that every 6 months or 1 year, the documents in the site go to the site owner for validation. Or if the site owner is no longer there, or the person who uploaded is no longer there, SharePoint, we can use the manager above them to validate it. And that's also where having that owner registry comes in, because the site needs updates. We want to do some upgrades to the site. We want to do a future migration. Having that log and up to date is very important. And then we want to manage the demand on our site. So somebody wants a new site, and we actually built in a form that whenever somebody wants a new site, they actually have to go through this little process. We don't hamper them. We actually enable them, because we do some validating upfront, getting the information, and then we have built-in workflows that are going to go ahead and say, okay, you know, we're going to contact you on this date to get the information, the next bit of information that we need, and please plan the process going forward. And so we actually can give them some menus here that are interactive, and then get the backup data. And that helps make sure that we build everything to fit within a structure, and that it doesn't just sprawl without guidance. And lastly, it's the support model. And we have to develop an ongoing support model that includes training. Now, very often what I like to do is develop a training model that's sort of like a pyramid. And we offer train-the-trainer training. We offer help modules. And we offer creating communities around SharePoint that enable the different teams to work together and answer each other's questions. Now, that's an ideal situation, and it doesn't always work. Very often, it might just be letting the community of site owners know what's out there, what's available, how we can support them, how we can enhance their business processes through workflows, through forms, through site design. And so we want to keep that ongoing communication of emails and webinars and team meetings going to keep the stakeholders engaged. By keeping the site owners engaged and the users engaged, they're constantly thinking about how they can improve the experience for their team. And we also keep the channel open for improvement to making the site better, and trying to minimize the I can't stand dealing with this intranet, it's not flexible, it doesn't let me do what I want. So we're going to keep everybody engaged in a constant communication process. And then we're going to have our maintenance processes. We're going to build a little help desk, a ticketing system if you don't already have one. And in this case, we have a demand process so that when new sites are requested, we can flow them through a tracking system, and we can offer help, again, through our tracking system. Now, keeping that support model going then also keeps everybody informed about what's going on in your SharePoint migration and what you have to look forward to in the new versions of SharePoint or in maintaining the version of SharePoint that you currently have. And that brings us to the question and answer portion of the presentation today. Again, I just want to thank you for your time, and I look forward to hearing from the crowd.
All right, great. Thanks, Elliot. Can you hear me okay, Elliot?
Yep, I hear you great.
Great. All right, so we got a couple questions coming in right now, so let's just get started. The first one we have here is, how did you determine to migrate to SharePoint on-premise versus online?
Right, so in this case, we actually had determined that by the IT group. So the IT said, okay, we have a SharePoint Online environment, that's what you're going to use. But very often we'll work with the IT department to determine what's the best solution for them. You know, if you need something like mailing to a list, SharePoint Online just doesn't do that. Whereas if you have just some basic needs to build up a quick templated site, you can do that in SharePoint Online.
Great. Next question. What do you do with your custom site versus standard sites?
So very often we have to determine whether or not something is actually a custom site or it's just a skin on a standard site. What I'd consider something custom might vary by organization. In this organization, anything that contains workflows or if it has any custom scripts on it, it's considered custom. But if it has just some sort of graphics and design stuff, it might not be considered custom if it fits within a template. So that'll change depending on the organization and how you do your development.
Okay. How many resources were required for your migration?
This migration we used between 5 and 10 employees, both within the organization as well as from onshore and offshore consultants to minimize costs and expedite the process.
Great. Next question we have here is, who needs to be involved when planning your migration?
You know, it's a great question. I really like to get everyone that I can involved, whether it's the employee's system that you're developing, to get an understanding of what they need from the system, to the executive leadership, because they're the ones that are going to mandate that, let's say, you use the tool that you're developing and that the employees are going to use. Sometimes those things don't align, and you actually have to work with both leadership and with the employees to make sure that they both get out of it what they're looking for.
Okay, great. We have one final question here. I just want to remind everyone, if you have any questions that you haven't asked yet, please use the interface and type away, and we'll answer. But as of right now, we have one pending question, and that is, do all migrations need migration tools?
Yeah, that really depends upon the scale of your migration and what you're doing. So, if you can swing a migration tool, some of them are really handy. They're very helpful to move over documents. You can bring over content version history. You can bring over the audit trails as well of the document. If you don't need those, then sometimes you can just get away with doing everything manually. So you can drag and drop or download a whole batch of documents and just move them back to the new location. Unfortunately, doing it by hand, you end up losing a little bit of the things like the version history and also the modified history of the document. Whereas if you use a tool, you can kind of maintain that integrity of your data.
All right, great. Well, that is all the questions that we've received today. Once again, I'd like to thank everyone for joining today. We'll be posting this webinar on the Pharmica website. I will send out an email notifying all of you when it's up. So if you enjoyed the content, know anyone else in your workplace or your network who might benefit from seeing it, please share it with them. If anyone is interested in learning more about Pharmica and the work we do with SharePoint or any of our other areas, please reach out to myself or Elliot. His contact information has been up on the screen. And, don't forget about those other webinars I mentioned. So Again, thank you all for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.